What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's very interesting discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet. We're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time. I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. If here on a Saturday this video gets to 1,000 likes, I will give one lucky commenter a cash prize. So make sure you say hello in the comments and hit that like button. Hopefully, we'll pick a winner Sunday or next week. The area of 10th and Oregon in South Philadelphia is a notorious corner. It's one that over the years, if you came up in Philadelphia, particularly in South Philly, you've heard of. Today, though, it is a place that features one of the best cheesesteak spots in Philadelphia. It is just a stone's throw away, and you can actually see Citizens Bank Park, the home of the Phillies, from that location. However, it wasn't always a corner that everyone knew about due to cheesesteaks. It also has a notorious history. The story of the very interesting 10th and Oregon crew next on the sit down. Before we delve into the actual crew itself, it's important to understand the landscape of this part of South Philadelphia, essentially between Moyamensing Avenue and Bigler Street and South. This is a location that for years has been kind of the stone's throw for the mafia. However, other groups have operated in this area as well in the vicinity of 10th, 11th, 12th in Oregon. There's a lot, at least in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. There was a bunch of loan sharking turf, extortion turf, drug dealing turf, and it wasn't just mobsters that ran around here. A lot of the time it was groups like the 10th and O crew, motorcycle clubs, and so on. Now, also, when I discuss the 10th and O crew, it's important to realize they were not mobsters. None of these people were inducted members of the mafia, though they all were moving around in the same circles. They knew guys in the mafia. And in fact, as we'll talk about with the first story of the actual creation of the group, those people were moving around in similar circles. Now, I want to make this clear. In the history of the 10th and O crew, there is no known fact that they ever kicked up to the Philly mob. They were all running independently. And we'll talk about some of the problems that came from them not paying the street tax. So stay tuned. The 10th and O crew is really two stories in one. The certain faction that created it, they all either go to prison or die, and a group takes over, and the remnants are continued into the 90s and into the 2000s. Before, though, you mentioned that group, you've got to talk about the Turas. And I'm going to talk about a brother duo and then the son of one of the brothers. One of the first people involved in the early remnants of the 10th and O crew was a person called Rocco Tura. Now, Rocco Tura was involved in produce. He could be seen here in the late 50s, moving around Washington Avenue. He had a stand where he sold fruits. But the thing about Rocco Tura as well is he was a criminal. Rocco Tura was born in 1942, and he was from the area of South Darien Street and Oregon Avenue. And that is just steps away from the 10th and Oregon area. Now, his criminal record, Rocco Tura, dates back to 1960, where he was arrested for breaking and entering as well as larceny in Atlantic City. In 1962, Rocco Tura would face burglary, assault, and impersonating police charges. And in late 1962, it was alleged that he stole $1,500 from a New Jersey mental hospital. Now, it wouldn't stop there for Rocco Tura. In 1967, he was one of 5 people arrested in connection with the shooting of a Teamsters Union official called Robert DeGeorge in Center City, Philadelphia. Arrested alongside Mr. Tura was Frank Sheeran, the Irishman, as well as Joseph Chicky Cianglini, who would down the road become a very high-ranking member of the Bruno faction of the Philly mob, or the Bruno family in the Philly mob, and then the Scarfo family in the Philly mob. Now, down the road, Rocco Turra would be acquitted of the Robert DeGeorge murder. Now, Rocco Turra had a brother, and his name was Anthony Turra. He would be born on July 24th, 1936, which would make him about 6 years older than his brother. Anthony Turra had a son called Louis, who was born on October 8th, 1964, and his arrest record begins in approximately the early 80s after he was arrested for car theft. Now, this is a family full of criminals. In the end, all of these people delved into the drug trade, robberies, loan sharking, bookmaking, and from their small area in South Philadelphia, they were able to control certain rackets. And one of the major things that Louis Turra, who takes the 10th and O crew into the 90s, which again, that's really the epicenter of the 10th and O crew. I don't necessarily think that Rocco and Anthony Turra were out in the corner at 10th and Oregon. Again, in their adult years, they would actually move to certain other parts of South Philadelphia. And Louis Turra kind of set up shop around 10th and Oregon. And from what I understand, he and his cousin, a person called Gaetano Polidoro, were essentially moving narcotics, acting as a wholesaler of narcotics, and they also controlled other people in South Philadelphia that were selling anything from weed to other illicit narcotics. And we would learn about that down the road in a federal case that was brought against all of these people. Now, in approximately 1995, Louis Turra was operating independently, he and the 10th and Oregon crew. There was an attempt allegedly made by the Joey Merlino faction of the Philly mob, and they were looking to collect, according to what we know, a street tax from Anthony and Louis Turra. Again, these guys are making a bunch of money because, again, operating independently, all you need is a few corners, a few dealers under you to make money. They also had sports betting, loan sharking. These guys were making some decent money. In fact, it was alleged that their drug empire was netting them a couple of $1 million a year. These guys were making real money. In fact, we would learn from an indictment involving these people down the road that a person would decide to flip, a person called Joseph Albanese, and he would testify against people like Gaetano Polidoro down the road. And specifically, Albanese would testify that Gaetano Polidoro would approach him in the summer of 1996 and told him about an agreement that he and a person called Joseph Davis had struck with Louis and Anthony Turra. According to Albanese, Louis Turra had promised Polidoro that he would teach him how to make methamphetamine and give him access to methamphetamine supplies if he provided assistance to his drug organization. Now, in fact, we would learn that this would involve him taking part in certain hits or assaults or whatever. Now, in 1995, Louis Turra is in a bar. And again, him and his father being supposedly shaken down for a street tax because they're making a bunch of money. Louis Turra is in a bar, and he's beaten and robbed of his Rolex inside the bar. He's also shot multiple times. Now, after that, Louis Turra's father, Anthony, is completely incensed because he believes that Skinny Joey Merlino and his pals ordered it, and they want to get back at Merlino. So Anthony Turra gets everybody together, including his son, Gaetano Polidoro, other members of Turra's group that were moving narcotics. And this is where, again, if we go back to what I just read from Joseph Albanese, who testified, the assistance that he was supposedly going to provide was helping Turra carry out a plot to whack Philadelphia crime boss Joey Merlino. Now, Albanese did not specifically mention the plot. However, it was believed that that was the assistance they were talking about. And Polidoro was the person that was instructed to allegedly go and whack Merlino. Now, from what we know, Mr. Turra, Anthony Turra, was caught on wiretap. And in the wiretap, you can hear Tura discuss about Merlino when he, quote, when he goes in the house 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, the cops are going to leave him, meaning they're not going to tail him anymore. They're not going to watch his house. Tura would then say, quote, they're just going to leave. That's when you just dump them blank grenades right in there with a couple of blank explosives and blow that fucking house from here to kingdom come. So essentially, the feds claim that Tura is talking about, using all sorts of things to get rid of the home of Joey Merlino. And there was also supposedly a part of the wiretap where Mr. Tura is discussing members of Merlino's family and that if they're just a part of it, who cares as well. So things are getting very touchy for Anthony Tura. Remember, this all led back to the fact that he and his son, Louis Tura, did not want to pay a street tax in their brackets. Now, this never happens. It never goes down. Nothing ever happens, as we know, to Joey Merlino because he's still around today, because the Turas, alongside Gaetano Polidoro, are indicted. They're indicted in mid-1997 on charges ranging from drugs to the attempted hit on Merlino, as well as a suspected murder of an informant. So everybody's kind of riled up in this. And, again, for the Merlino faction and the Philly mob, they're happy because now these guys are off the street and we don't got to deal with it anymore. However, the story does not end with the early remnants of the 10th and O crew, Louis and Anthony Tura, as well as Gaetano Polidoro. Let's talk about what happens to all of these people. Louis Tura, while awaiting trial in January of 1998, would be found dead in his cell at MCC in Manhattan, and it's alleged that he offed himself. Now, there have been theories over the years that he didn't off himself and that something else happened. We'll never really know, but Louis Tura that day died in his cell. Now, I'll talk about Gaetano Polidoro in just a second, but I want to talk about the very brutal and violent end for Anthony Tura, essentially the patriarch of this small group in South Philadelphia. In March of 1998, Mr. Tura, alongside his female companion, left his home in the area of 2228 South 20th Street in South Philadelphia. Now, that is between Passyunk Avenue and Wolf Street, just off the corner of that location. As he walked down the steps of his home, he was shot multiple times by a masked assailant. Now, no bullet casings were recovered, so it's ventured to believe that a revolver was used due to the fact that a revolver doesn't have casings. He would die at the scene. Now, at the time of his death, Anthony Tura suffered from lymphoma, heart issues, and emphysema, and really was near the end anyway. He was very sick, and he was actually on his way that day to federal court. And this was pretty much in broad daylight. Somebody takes him out. They run down 20th Street towards Wolf, get into a car, and they're out of there. Now, I will make this clear. I'm not going to name who, but 2 members or associates of Joey Merlino were interrogated on this, but nothing came of it because nobody said anything, and it was discussed that it was a waste of time. No one has ever been charged in the death of Anthony Tura. Now, I will discuss Rocco Tura, the first person we talked about. He is actually still alive today and is living in South Philadelphia. From what I understand, he's actually done pretty well for himself. I don't have an updated photo, but one thing we do know about Rocco Tura is he flipped. He was arrested as well in that case involving all the Turas. He decided to flip and is in his 80s and living in South Philadelphia. He's living alone, and that's that. He is viewed as an informant, though. Gaetano Polidoro would die in prison as well in 1999. It's alleged that he died from an overdose. At the time that he was arrested, it was said that Gaetano Polidoro was a known drug addict. He would die in federal prison in Pennsylvania. So that's kind of the end of the early 10th and O crew. However, it doesn't end because other people by the late 90s have taken over the remnants of the crew. Once these guys are all arrested in 98, younger members step up, guys that lived in the area. They start assuming the responsibilities and taking over some of the rackets that these guys before them, the Turas, had. One of the people that takes over the crew is a person called Eugene Genie Boy Miller. Now, as well, and I don't have a photo of Genie Boy, but also included and connected to this group were Nicky Slick DiPietro on the far left, as well as on the far right, a person called Johnny Garbarino. Also connected to this crew was, as I said, Genie Boy Miller, John Hendry, and Andrew Dew McCallie. And we'll talk about what happens to all these people here in a second. But what we then know is in the late 90s, the new remnants of the 10th and O crew, guys that lived in the area that operated out of bars and restaurants in the area, homes, that sort of thing, they're getting into bookmaking, drug dealing, loan sharking, all that stuff. A couple of things they can make money off of. A street tax. Again, people want their end in this. Now, remember, one of the groups also operating in South Philadelphia at the time is the Pagans Motorcycle Club. And this is where, again, another kind of mini dispute happens. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about Genie Boy Miller because he is the reputed kind of alleged leader of this group, though I don't think there was a particularly big leader. They all kind of ran around together. Eugene Miller was born in 1967, and in 1995, he was arrested on aggravated assault, conspiracy, and firearms charges, and there was no end as far as from what I was able to research. Now, in February of 1999, around that time, Eugene Miller operated a bar called the King Dome Bar on 12th and Oregon, just 2 blocks away from 10th and Oregon. Understand, essentially from 8th and Oregon to 12th and Oregon, that was kind of 10th and O territory, all along Oregon Avenue there. Now, the Kingdom Bar is no longer around. It hasn't been around for a while now. But Genie Boy owned that bar. He's in there one night, hanging out, February 1999. 5 alleged members of the Pagans bust in and bust him up. They shoot him, beat him up. It's bad. Now, according to a street source, Genie Boy was running his mouth about people, saying he doesn't, quote, take shit from anyone. Now, the bar was also shot up as well because there was bullet holes in the walls and everything around it. And this was a message: shut the hell up to Genie Boy Miller. Now, it's also discussed that at one point, Genie Boy had something to say about certain other people as well. And this was a message to him, shut the hell up, basically. Now, down the road, there would be a sit-down in the area of 10th and Oregon. And a sit-down was conducted by members of the Pagans. Joey Merlino was supposedly in attendance for this. And this was a way to kind of quell some of the issues going on, right, between certain groups. Nothing happened. There was no peace agreement made, and things would continue. Now, in August of 1999, a member of the Pagans Motorcycle Crew, one of the presidents of the Philadelphia chapter, a person called Stephen Gorilla Montevergine, would be shot 9 times as he left a bar off of Oregon Avenue. Now, he would survive and spend nearly 1 month in a hospital. And again, these guys are fighting over very lucrative loan sharking, bookmaking, drug dealing, trade territory on Oregon Avenue. Now, Gorilla is an interesting figure, and if you're from the Philly area and you know anything about organized crime, you've likely heard of him. Now, Gorilla took this very seriously, as he should. These individuals tried to kill him. He was near his mother's home in South Philadelphia. In February of 2000, in the area of 8th and Oregon Avenues in South Philadelphia, at a deli, a person called Michael Hendry would be shot inside the deli that he owned called Michael's. Now, Michael Hendry was an alleged member of the 10th and O crew, and his brother John Hendry moved around together in that group. Now, this wouldn't stop. In November of 2000, just months later, Stephen Gorilla Montevergine allegedly spotted John Hendry in the area of 11th and Argon Avenues in South Philly, and in broad daylight fired multiple shots towards John Hendry. So again, this is in broad daylight on a busy street in South Philly. Understand, there are cars all over, there are people walking around. Gorilla spots Johnny Hendry because he believes Johnny Hendry was the guy or one of the guys that attempted to kill him several months before. He did a month in the hospital over that. He wants to get back. So he shoots up and attempts to kill John Hendry, but he misses. He doesn't hit him. Gorilla Montevergine is arrested minutes later. He would ultimately get 27 months in prison over this little stunt. So again, multiple members of the Pagans, of the 10th and O crew, they're going back and forth. People are getting shot in delis. Gorillas shooting at somebody in open daylight on Argon Avenue. Cars whizzing by. It's a mess. And this is one of these mini wars that's broken out in South Philly over the years. And remember, guys, this isn't in 1970. This is in the early 2000s. Now, ultimately, Gorilla goes to jail, and this beef dies down a bit. Most of the 10th and O crew, a lot of them, most notably John Hendry, they head down to South Jersey. They start operating out of Deptford, that area, though it wouldn't be the last we've heard of them. They actually, supposedly, a couple of months later, beat up a couple of Philly mob associates in a club called Rock Lobster in Penn's Landing. These guys were still doing what they had to do. And in turn, in a matter of a couple of years, these guys made a bunch of money. And when you look into them today, most of the 10th and O crew are just regular people now. They're in their 50s and they've given up their life of crime, as far as we know. And this was just something they did in their 20s and 30s. They made some money. If you look into a lot of these guys, they have many properties, they have businesses. They were able to move on without much in the way of scrutiny from the law. Now, in terms of John Hendry, he would actually be arrested on attempted murder charges in relation to supposedly being involved in the shooting of Stephen Gorilla Montevergine. However, today he has moved on in his life. I believe he lives in New Jersey somewhere, and he's just a regular guy in society. Now, in terms of Jeannie Boy Miller, he is in his late 50s. He lives in New Jersey, owns a bunch of property, and is just living out the rest of his life. You know, these guys kind of just moved on. You know, they I think chalked up their lives to, we did some things in our 20s and 30s. It got a little crazy, and now we're living out our life doing different. You talk about guys that would be really interesting to speak to. Johnny Hendry, Jeannie Boy Miller, a lot of these guys, just really interesting characters. You know, they've lived an interesting life. You know, some of these guys, you know, allegedly battled with, you know, motorcycle clubs and stuff. Just fascinating street people, really. Couple of other people involved in this. I want to talk a little bit about their outcomes. Andrew McCauley would ultimately leave the 10th and O crew and begin essentially operating, playing poker, gambling, sports betting. He was jammed up in a case out of the Borgata Casino in Atlantic City in the late 2000s. It was alleged he was the point man in a gigantic bookmaking ring run out of the poker room at the Borgata. It was said that he operated wire rooms, and some of the people named in that case were actually either members or associates of the Philly mob. Andrew McCauley would ultimately be given 5 years in that case. It's unclear what he's up to today. I want to discuss one of the other members who moved around in this cohort, a person called Nicodemo Nicky Slick DiPietro. Now, in February of 2000, he was involved, allegedly, in the murder of a person called Tad Green. Now, this would happen at a club called Deco down in Penn's Landing. From what we know, Nicky Slick was at Deco with friends of his. Now they arrived at the venue and were about to enter. Now the front door had a metal detector, but the back entrance didn't. So Nicky and one of the people he was with entered through the front, and a person they were with called Blondie and another man went through the back because, again, they likely had a weapon. Now, once they were inside and mingled for a little, got a drink, a dispute would arise between the guy Blondie that Nicky Slick was with and a person called Tad Green. Now, Tad Green owed some sort of drug debt and money to this guy Blondie. An argument ensued, and a gunshot was fired inside the club. Now, obviously, Tad Green fell down. Confusion, pandemonium ensues. People were running everywhere, according to what was said. Now, the guy Blondie, Nicky Slick, and the others bolted out of the door, and Blondie handed the piece to Nicky Slick, allegedly, and Nicky tossed it away. Now, eventually, the police would arrive, and witnesses pointed out the men getting into the car, which one of them was Nicky Slick. Now, statements were taken by 3 witnesses, and they described the shooter as, quote, blonde, 6 foot tall, with a Yankee jacket. Now, Tad Green was rushed to a hospital and later died. Now, the police never went to the hospital to question Tad Green prior to him passing. And if we see, Nicky Slick DiPietro is not blonde, and he doesn't look anything like what the witnesses said the shooter looked like. Now, down the road, Nicky Slick will be charged with murder and stand trial. He would eventually be convicted and is serving life in prison. Now, here he can be seen in federal prison at one point with Tommy Karate Patera. And today, 20 plus years later, Nicky Slick DiPietro is still in prison. This time, though, he has been moved to state prison. Here he can be seen in a state prison photo as he sits at the State Correctional Institution at Huntington, just outside of Philadelphia. Now, Nicky Slick has moved from multiple trials, retrials, hasn't gotten them. Again, he has written to journalists. He has discussed that he is innocent. He did not commit this crime, and that the person that committed it is still out there. Now, one thing I will add in, Nicky Slick's, one of his relations was a person called Gino DiPietro, I believe was his cousin. He was whacked about 10 years ago, which I did a video on and can be seen here. We talked a little bit about Nicky Slick in that video as well. So, the 10th and O crew, pretty much defunct now. Still around. They still are all alive for the most part. They just are done. I think they've moved into, they made some money when they were kids and they moved into legitimate business. And now 10th and Oregon is really just a location where you can get a great cheesesteak. Maybe you can head down to Tanky's Tavern, which at one point was a place called Cookies. You can get yourself a beer or a snack, and you maybe get a steak and walk down to the Phillies game, which you can see from Oregon Steaks. I will say this as this video ends. In my opinion, the best cheesesteak in Philadelphia is at Oregon Steaks. That simple. Now, I do remember, because as many of you know, I lived in South Philadelphia for years. I remember years ago, Oregon Steaks was actually a place called what the hell was it called? 10th Ave. That's right, 10th Ave. It was like a luncheonette type of place. It was dingy. It didn't look like it would be any good, but it was actually really good. And I remember years ago when we would play stickball, we would play down at a schoolyard not far from 10th and Oregon. We would go in there and eat. They were open. I want to say they were open 24 hours. I think. I might be wrong. Maybe 2 a.m. We used to go in there. Their chicken cheesesteaks were really good. But now it's Oregon Steaks, one of the best in the city. So I hope you enjoyed this video. A little long today, but an interesting group nonetheless. When we look back on South Philadelphia, the mob, some of the things that went on, we don't really think about the 10th and O crew, but the remnants of both the original group and then the later group not only went to war with motorcycle clubs, but even at one point had a run-in possibly with Joey Merlino. I will end this with, in the Vlad TV interview, Joey Merlino was actually asked about Anthony Tura. because down the road, Joey Merlino would face one of the counts in his racketeering case was the murder of Anthony Turra, which he ultimately beat, as we know. But he said he knew of them, but he didn't say much more than that. He just said he had, quote, read about it in the paper. So we'll believe him on that. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.